Welcome to part two of the Canada FASD Research Network's trainee webinar series, Emerging Action in Research. Thanks so much for joining us today. So my name is Katherine Flannigan. I'm a research associate with Canada FASD Research Network, and I'm also a psychologist with background in assessment and diagnosis, intervention, and legal issues experienced by people with FASD. As part of my role as research associate this year with CanFASD, I was able to coordinate the trainee program for the first time ever. And it's been really wonderful to meet this new and upcoming passionate group of early FASD researchers. So today, we're going to all hear about the work that they're doing to move the FASD field forward. And before we get into the presentations, as we begin, I would like to take a moment for a land acknowledgement, as an important step in reconciliation is the acknowledgement of traditional treaty lands and recognition for the people of the territory. So the Canada FASD Research Network recognizes the historical significance and contributions of Indigenous peoples and their cultures, and understands the important role that the Indigenous community plays today and in the future. We acknowledge that we live, work, and meet on traditional territories across Canada. Many of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. I personally am joining this meeting today from Treaty 6 territory in what we now call Alberta. This is the traditional home of many Indigenous peoples, including the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. For most of my life, I have lived and worked in Waskahegan, which is the Cree word for Edmonton. And I am really grateful for the gifts given to me by my connection to this land, as well as the Indigenous communities and peoples, past and present, who I have been privileged to know and learn from. So today in this webinar, you'll be hearing from 6 trainees from the 2025 cohort of CanFASD trainees. This webinar series. It's a series that we host every year for new researchers in the FASD community to share the projects and the research and programs that they're working in. So as I mentioned earlier, this is part 2 of a 2-part series. The first 5 trainees presented their research back in May, and you are more than welcome to find the recording of that webinar on the CanFASD YouTube channel. Okay, so without further ado, I will jump into some introductions. Our first presenter today is Laura Orchard. Laura is a master's student in interdisciplinary health at Laurentian University. She's passionate about improving health equity and well-being in northern and rural communities across Ontario. Laura is especially dedicated to supporting individuals with FASD, their families, and the people who work to support them every day. In her presentation today, Laura will reflect on what she's learned through the CanFASD training program and how it has challenged her to think differently about support, equity, and connection. So with that, Laura, I'll hand it over to you.
So hi everyone, I'm Laura. I'm really excited to be here today to share some work that I care deeply about and have been involved in on the revision of the Sociosexual Knowledge and Attitudes Assessment Tool, version 3, or commonly known as the SCAT-3. My focus is on supporting sociosexual education for individuals with developmental disabilities and how we as clinicians, researchers, and support can help make assessment tools more accessible, inclusive, and impactful, particularly for people living in rural or remote areas. So it's important to note that the SCAT-3 assessment tool I'll be talking about today is currently still in the data collection phase. However, once published, it will be applicable for assessing and supporting the sociosexual knowledge and attitudes of people with FASD. With that in mind, today's presentation will focus on 3 key areas. Number 1, the current gap in assessment and education. Number 2, why sociosexual education matters for people with FASD. And number 3, how the SCAT-3 can help address these gaps to support more informed, person-centered learning. I hope today's session sparks some meaningful discussion. Okay, and before we dive in, I want to take a moment to offer a content warning. This presentation will briefly include discussion of sensitive topics, including sexual health and sexual harm or sexual assault. So I recognize that these topics can be difficult. If at any point you do need to take a pause or take a break or step away, please know that is absolutely okay. Your well-being matters, and you are the best judge for what feels right for you in this space. So let's look at the numbers for a moment. Research shows that up to 83% of people with FASD experience challenges with social understanding and personal boundaries. And more than half have reported experiencing sexual harm. This is a staggering figure that highlights just how important this issue really is. When we zoom out to look at developmental disabilities more broadly, the need for support becomes even clearer. So, studies show that people in these communities are significantly more likely to experience sexual abuse compared to their non-disabled peers. To be clear, this is not because of FASD, but because people with FASD are often not afforded access to the same education, same resources, and same protective supports compared to their peers. And yet, many people with FASD in particular receive little to no formal sexual education that is in an institutional setting such as schools, community programs, healthcare settings. And this is especially pronounced in rural or remote areas where services can be harder to reach. So these numbers tell a very clear story. There's a gap between what people need and what they're getting. And that gap calls for thoughtful, person-centered action. Even though there are clear gaps in sociosexual education for people with FASD and other developmental disabilities, these gaps show us where meaningful change is possible. Everyone deserves access to learning that reflects how they understand the world and that respects their unique experiences, communication styles, and goals. For many, important social learning happens informally through friendships, conversations, or everyday interactions, but not everyone has those same opportunities, and that's why intentional personalized education is so important. Awareness in this area is growing, and with it, so are the ways we can offer support. From using technology to developing more accessible, responsive tools that meet people where they are, regardless of where they live. The SCAT3 is one example of this. This tool can help us understand a person's starting point so that sociosexual education and support can be tailored in ways that reflect their needs and their strengths. So I bet you're thinking, Laura, what is the SCAT3? Thank you to Dr. Shelley Watson, version 3 of the Sociosexual Knowledge and Attitudes Assessment Tool is an updated version of the SCAT that is designed to better understand how someone thinks and feels about relationships, contraception, boundaries, and sexual health. The SCAT3 is designed to be respectful, accessible, and inclusive. It includes visual supports, so pictures and illustrations that represent real-life situations. It includes knowledge and attitude-based questions. The tool explores what someone knows and how they feel about topics like body autonomy and consent. It also includes real-life scenarios. So people are invited to respond to everyday situations. For example, if someone asks for a hug, what could you do? This helps us understand how the person applies their knowledge in the moment. The SCAT also includes updated inclusive content. So the newest version is going to reflect a broad range of lived experiences, including gender diversity, cultural context, internet safety, and different forms of contraception. At its core, the SCAT3 is not just an assessment tool, it's a starting point for respectful conversations and personalized learning that supports safety, confidence, and connection. Now that we've explored what the SCAT3 is, let's talk about how it can support people with FASD. The tool's use of visuals and real-life based questions aligns well with how people with FASD understand and engage with the world. This helps us learn what someone feels confident in and where they might want extra support around relationships, boundaries, and making safe choices. The SCAT3 also offers space for collaborative conversations between the person, their families, their caregivers, and the professionals who support them, which ultimately builds trust and a shared understanding. In this way, the SCAT3 is more than a tool. It's a way to honor and support each other's journey toward a safer and more meaningful connection. 'Cause, 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 'cause So the SCAT-3 provides detailed insight into a person's current understanding and attitudes about important topics relating to relationships, boundaries, and sexual health. This helps families, educators, and support teams design education plans that are truly tailored to the individual's specific needs. For example, if the assessment shows someone needs more support in understanding how to say no or recognize unsafe situations, their education plan can include targeted lessons and practice in those areas. If someone is already confident in navigating unsafe situations, the focus can then shift to other learning goals that matter most to the individual. This tailored approach means that learning is paced appropriately and reflects each person's communication style, their cultural background, and lived experience. It also supports building skills gradually, so starting where the person is and moving forward with respect and encouragement. Most importantly, the SCAT-3 isn't a one-time assessment. It can be revisited regularly to monitor progress and adjust education plans as someone grows and their needs change. As I personally continue with this work, my master's thesis will focus on how this SCAT-3 can be used in different formats. Specifically, I'll be exploring how the experience might differ when it's delivered remotely versus in person. To me, this is especially important when we think about accessibility. As we know, many people with FASD, as well as their family and their support teams, live in rural or remote communities where in-person services may not be available or easy to access. With this in mind, my research will aim to explore, one, how the format, so virtual or in person, might impact a person's level of engagement or understanding of the assessment process. Two, whether the way the tool is delivered influences the responses that people share. And three, what adaptations would help ensure that the SCAT-3 remains inclusive and flexible, no matter where the person lives or how they connect with support. In my opinion, this work is an important step in helping the assessment tool grow into something that is not only impactful, but also is adaptable, equitable, and is rooted in accessibility for the clinicians, researchers, and community educators using the tool. So I've shared a few key ideas with you today. We've talked about why sociosexual development is such an important part of supporting people with FASD, not just for their health and safety, but for their confidence, their connection, and informed decision-making. We also discussed some of the gaps in education and access and how tools like the SCAT-3 can help bridge those gaps. And lastly, we explored what the SCAT-3 is, how it works, and how it can be used to guide learning that's truly personalized, inclusive, and empowering. I want to end by offering a sincere thank you to the many people who make this work possible, to the researchers, clinicians, and educators who are helping move the field forward. Thank you for your commitment to learning and advocacy. To the families and caregivers who provide day-to-day support, encouragement, and care, your role is so essential and deeply appreciated. And most importantly, to those with FASD, thank you for sharing your stories, your perspective, and your trust. Your experiences are the very foundation of everything we do. Together, you're helping create a more inclusive and empowering future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. That was fantastic. This topic comes up frequently in the research community as one that is really under addressed. So it's really awesome that you're doing work in this area, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you learn. Thank you. Okay, our second presenter is Kiana Chuby. Kiana is a second-year master's student in the School and Clinical Child Psychology program at the University of Alberta. Her research interests include cross-cultural research, mental health, and working with marginalized youth and individuals affected by FASD. Kiana will be presenting today on her master's thesis, which examines the impacts of the Wellness, Resiliency, and Partnership, or WRAP project, from the experience of WRAP coaches who provide school-based supports for high school students with FASD in Alberta. So I'll pass it over to you, Kiana.
So as Katie mentioned, I'm going to be presenting on my master's thesis. So this is a project on the Wellness, Resiliency, and Partnership project, specifically for students with FASD. So students with FASD often experience challenges in school due to impairments in attention, learning, memory, executive functioning, adaptive functioning, and self-regulation. Difficulties with self-regulation can result in conflicts with peers and class disruptions. In terms of strengths, students with FASD often have individual talents in art, drama, music, and sports. However, many students with FASD find school to be stressful, and they may feel overburdened with class requirements. This results in students with FASD having higher rates of school suspensions, expulsions, and dropouts compared to students without FASD. Students with FASD often require special educational services or accommodations. However, most students with FASD are enrolled within a general classroom. So in general, teachers tend to lack the knowledge and strategies needed to support students with FASD. Strategies like taking planned breaks, allowing students more processing time, and considering that students may be functioning at a developmentally younger level may be helpful. Teachers often don't recognize FASD as a brain-based disability, and they may not consider students' behavior as due to their disability. Students with FASD are successful in school when they have positive relationships with teachers and they feel that their unique needs are understood. Teachers need to adapt a neurodevelopmental model when working with students by shifting their perspective on the meaning of success. Teachers also need better training and resources to help students with FASD be successful in school. And this is where the WRAP project comes in. So the WRAP project was a school-based supportive project that was designed to meet this need. The WRAP project provided students with FASD with individualized, strength-based, and wraparound supports in schools across Alberta. Success coaches delivered the supports, and they acted as a bridge between caregivers and the school. Success coaches advocated for students' needs, provided students with supports, connected them with resources, and provided teachers with FASD-informed strategies. So the WRAP project ran from 2009 to 2017 in schools across Alberta, and the goals of the project were to build capacity around FASD, so really educating teachers about FASD, and also increasing school engagement and enhancing the academic achievement and career potential for students with FASD. So for my method, I conducted a secondary data analysis of 9 focus groups that were conducted between 2014 and 2016. And these focus groups were done with success coaches. So as for my method, I used qualitative descriptions. So I stayed really close to the data and my codes were directly derived from the data. I didn't go beyond what was already said within the data. I also used thematic analysis to identify patterns within the data, then group them into codes and then group that into themes. So as for my participants included 24 success coaches. They all identified as women, and they ranged in age from 26 years old to 58 years old with an average age of 32 years old. So they came from a variety of educational backgrounds related to human service work, including but not limited to social work, education. Some of them were educational assistants, psychology, and child and youth care. And most coaches had previous experience working in the field of FASD prior to their role as a success coach. So my research question was, what are the impacts on students of participating in the WRAP program from the perspective of success coaches? So I really focused on outcomes of the project from the perspective of coaches. So here are my results. I have 4 themes and multiple codes within each theme. So the first theme that I identified was school success. The second, experience wraparound supports. The third was social emotional gains. And the last one was developing positive relationships between coaches and students. Next, I'll go through each of these themes and provide some examples of some of my findings. So the first theme was school success. So students experienced school success in a variety of ways. Through coaches' efforts, students completed homework, passed classes, increased their grades, improved their attendance, and graduated high school. Students also had a more positive view and experience of the school system. So this quote talks about how a coach helped a student increase his attendance and graduate high school. The coach shared, if you looked at his year, the student would have had things he had to overcome, like being homeless, having no money, parents leaving, and all of that. I mean, the odds of him failing and not getting his last semester were really high. And I really do think it was only because I was on top of. Like, if he wasn't there one morning, I was calling him, why aren't you at school? So I think if you looked at his whole year, he wouldn't have graduated. And I think because of all the things I did, he's graduating. So the coach would check in with the student when he wasn't at school to kind of see what was going on. The coach also went out of her way to ensure that he had stable housing. And altogether, these efforts helped the student graduate high school. So this quote here talks about how a coach advocated for students to have in-school suspensions rather than out-of-school suspensions. This coach shared, "I sat down with 2 administrators and convinced them that a 5-day out-of-school suspension wasn't going to do anything for this kid. He was in the middle of nowhere and it was going to be a holiday. And so I worked it from 5 days out of school to 3 days out of school to 2 days in school to finally it was 1 day in my office working on missed assignments. And through that, he asked me if the next Friday we could do the same thing." So he was not only caught up and the admin was happy, he realized, it was how helpful it was to sit and just get work done. So he sat for 3 Fridays in a row and helped him get caught up on assignments. So the coach talked about how she helped the student get caught up on assignments and get schoolwork done, rather than getting more behind on schoolwork, having an out-of-school suspension. So my next theme was wraparound support. So coaches connected students with community resources, provided students with support outside of school by texting and calling students, and providing them with transportation when they didn't have a way to get to school. Coaches also educated teachers and school staff about FASD, adapted the school environment in response to students' needs, and coaches worked together with caregivers, teachers, and other support workers to communicate and address students' needs. So this first quote talks about how coaches provided support for students outside of school hours. The coach shared, "Be it unprofessional or be it, but I think we can't provide support and then have that support end at 4, and either not be the one to provide that support or connect them to somebody else who will provide them with that support. Because a lot of our kids' stuff happens after 4, right?" So the coach talked about how she provided support to students outside of school hours at times when they may not have had access to somebody else to talk to. The second quote here talks about how coaches acted as a bridge between parents, caregivers, and schools. The coach said, "I think a really big factor here is communication. So, making sure the parents and caregivers understand school perspectives, teacher perspectives, school expectations. And the same goes for teachers." So the coach talked about how she really worked on improving communication and between the school and between caregivers at home. Students also experienced social emotional gains. So according to coaches, students had enhanced social emotional well-being by gaining social skills, coping skills, self-regulation skills, conflict resolution skills, and self-confidence. For example, this quote discussed how students had an increased confidence in themselves through coaches' efforts. So the coach said, really pumping them up, and that it goes a long way with that belief system in themselves. That after I'm done with the student for a year, this year especially, that my kids seem to really have a positive outlook on themselves, whereas before they didn't think about it or whatever. They were just kind of floating along, but I just find that I guess it's their self-confidence in themselves, and that they feel that they're really succeeding. So my last theme here was developing positive relationships between students and coaches. So this quote talks about how students received caring support and had access to a safe person to talk to. So just creating that safe environment for students. First off, a lot of them don't have anybody to listen to them. So to just be that person who can come and who's checking in on them. "Hey, how's your day?" And forming the relationship with students. You just get to know them. They start to feel more safe. I remember one girl wouldn't talk to anyone about anything. "I just want to know, it's all personal." And then within a week, she was coming to see me every day, So developing these positive relationships between students and coaches was really helpful for students, and coaches really provided that safe environment and a person for them to talk to. So overall, the biggest limitation of this study is that it only represents coaches' perspectives. The focus groups only included success coaches and not students. So it's possible that students may have had different perspectives on outcomes of this project. And students with FASD do need extra support in school. As I mentioned, students with FASD often experience challenges in several areas, and many students with FASD have experienced trauma, all which create additional barriers with school engagement. So overall, success coaches help students achieve numerous positive outcomes. Students experience academic success, wraparound supports, social emotional gains, and developing positive relationships. Overall, wraparound supports appear to be vital in ensuring the academic success for students with FASD. More schools may consider implementing wraparound supports to continue to promote students' school success and future engagement. And I would like to thank Dr. Melissa Tremblay and Chloe Devereaux for their help with this project. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kiana. That was really interesting to hear about. And I loved a lot of it, but I loved what you were saying about reframing success and having a really strengths-based approach. So I really appreciate that new perspective and think that that'll be a great project to follow. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, so our next presenter is Emma Williams. Emma is a research assistant at the Rehabilitation Center for Children in Winnipeg, Manitoba. She has a Bachelor of Science from Dalhousie, focused on biochemistry, molecular biology, and neuroscience. Although Emma is not able to attend today in real time, she has recorded a video for us where she shares her work on how the ways that language perspectives and approaches to caring for children and youth with FASD, how that has changed over the last 10 years in primary care. So we're going to play her recording now.
Hi, everyone. My name's Emma Williams, and I am sorry that I wasn't able to make it here today live and in person, but I am excited to share the research work that we've been doing for the past couple of months. And this work is, in essence, a review of the last 10 years of work with children and youth with FASD. With this presentation, I'd like to give a little information about what we're currently doing in Manitoba, some of the background behind the research, and then give you some highlights from the papers that we've been reviewing so far. And to start off with where we currently are, at least in Manitoba, I'd like to share a little bit about the Manitoba FASD network. So the FASD network here was established in 2009 and is a province-wide effort to provide FASD assessment and short-term follow-up services accessible to all Manitobans. The network aims to centralize referral, assessment, and support services for children through all 5 health regions in Manitoba, from Winnipeg to the north. And the network takes referrals from around the province and provides multidisciplinary assessments, consisting of a team of coordinators and social workers, speech-language pathologists, geneticists, occupational therapists, psychologists, and developmental pediatricians. The network aims to assess children and youth for FASD, and in this assessment, identify their strengths and challenges, which are then kept in mind to make recommendations, more referrals, and direct families toward resources to build up systems of support. And we're at this place with the Manitoba FASD network, in part due to all the research work that has been done both in Canada and internationally up to this point. But to highlight one in particular, in 2015, an article was published by my supervisor and CanFASD diagnostic lead, Dr. Anna Hanlon-Dearman. This article sought to review and organize the literature surrounding the care of children and youth with FASD into a comprehensive set of topics and practice points for primary healthcare providers. The article covered a broad scope of topics relating to the health and wellness of children with FASD, including behavior and learning, management of ADHD and other co-occurring disorders, pharmacotherapeutics, including choline supplementation, self-regulation, social skills, family support and attachment, growth, sleep, nutrition, mental health, counseling, both for children and prenatally, and harm reduction, including safety planning. And now that it's been 10 years since that first review, it's a great time to update the recommendations, seeing what's changed and what's new, and what brings us now to our current research work. So the current review, led by Dr. Prabhat Bedi, is a systematic review of all English language articles published about the care of children and youth with FASD from 2015 onwards. Systematic review, quickly, is a type of study that essentially gathers as many papers as possible on a given subject, filters them out, and narrows them down to a smaller list that's directed at a specific question. For our case, our question is, what are the current needs and strengths of children with youth and with FASD, and how are we addressing and supporting them? Through this, we'd like to identify needs, inform guidelines of care, and promote support across the lifespan. So for this, we initially collected 707 articles. These were screened to make sure they all fit within the years of publication and topics we wanted to learn about. From there, 470 articles passed that initial screening and went through another closer round of reviewing to make sure these papers had the information we need. And now finally, we've narrowed down that 470 to about 178 articles. We still need to pull the data from them and really analyze what they're saying. But for this presentation, I'd just like to highlight a few of the themes or kind of overarching conclusions we're kind of seeing. Firstly, the attitudes and education of primary care providers and other public sector professionals that might be involved in the care of children and youth with FASD has been a more recent topic of research, with the understanding that effective care of individuals requires awareness of FASD and its prevalence, knowledge of how it might impact an individual, and an empathetic person-focused approach. A 2022 study that we have selected for a review was itself a review of previous surveys of these professionals on their attitudes, practices, knowledge, and training in working with individuals with FASD. This included healthcare providers, social services workers, legal system professionals, and educators. And the findings were kind of similar across all these sectors, that most professionals do have a basic awareness of FASD, but this awareness only really goes so far. Knowing FASD might impact the brain or day-to-day life is one thing, but understanding exactly what challenges might arise for someone with FASD navigating these systems is critical. These surveys showed, generally across the board, that professionals have an incomplete understanding of how FASD might impact the day-to-day lives of individuals, especially in how that might impact how the professionals themselves interact with someone with FASD. And this is also a product of insufficient institutional training on accommodating for people with FASD. And then another point to note is that a number of professionals also did share attitudes in these surveys that were aligned with stigmatized views on FASD, which really continues to emphasize the need for greater education and training, knowing that understanding and empathy come from knowledge. There are several educational and training programs in place for professionals in these sectors, but it really does take time and effort to shed stigma. Another thing that's been really noticeable in the last 10 years of work in FASD has been the development of many childhood intervention programs, especially ones that are at home, focused on both caregiver and child programming, and are adaptable to children's individual needs. I have a few listed here that are in development or currently in use in FASD spaces. So the first is the ALERT program for self-regulation. This was first developed in the 90s by occupational therapists and continues to be developed. It aims to help children with FASD with their self-regulation skills, executive functioning like decision-making, and social skills. And it uses an analogy of a car engine to help teach these skills. Next, the Math Interactive Learning Experience, or MILE program, was developed more recently and aims to help children with learning readiness and memory through math tutoring and games, and additionally offers workshops to caregivers on FASD education, parental skills, and advocacy skills. Next, Families on Track combines at-home visit counseling and children's groups in order to help families with identifying and addressing their needs, educating and supporting caregivers, and helping children with their self-esteem and social skills. The GO-FAR program, in which FAR stands for Focus and Plan, Act and Reflect, is a program meant to help children with self-regulation, adaptive living skills, and attention through computer games and therapy sessions, while also helping parents with education and counseling sessions. Through these past 10 years, more emphasis has begun to be placed on moving what interventions we can out of the clinic, and then also taking the time to involve and support families and caregivers. Finally, what I'd last like to highlight is something that, through our review, has become apparent is still a major roadblock in effective lifelong care for individuals with FASD, and that is the significant gap in supports and programming for adolescents and especially young adults. Many of the articles that we selected for our review are focused almost entirely on children, and really, despite the understanding that FASD is lifelong, the resources we have available have yet to reflect that. Of the articles that did focus on adolescents and young adults, there were 4 main topics. Mental health was a primary focus of most of these papers, reflecting that adolescents and young adults with FASD are at a higher risk for having traumatic experiences or developing mood disorders, such as depression. The mental health of individuals with FASD should therefore be monitored and supported throughout life according to their needs, keeping the factors that may be influencing mental wellness in mind, which would be individual factors such as trauma and self-esteem, relational factors such as attachment to family and friendships, and environmental factors. Many papers report on these higher risks, but programming to respond to them are lacking. Another paper from 2019 reported differences in reproductive health in individuals with FASD, including the onset and dynamics of reproductive development and its duration. This paper was a review of all the literature on these differences, and there is still very little research exploring this topic. But as it stands, clinicians are recommended to help monitor, manage, and aid with counseling. A 2023 review of employment resources for individuals with FASD also reflected these significant gaps in the literature. This review only was able to include 16 publications, of which only 4 of those were peer-reviewed articles. There are multiple barriers to employment that individuals with FASD might face, including cognitive challenges, financial difficulties, which, for example, would relate to transport to work, and a lack of relational supports. This article suggests pre-employment counseling programming for individuals with FASD, aiding with work skills, confidence, and helping individuals with feeling more in control of their situations. Additionally, employer education and accommodation and destigmatization were recommended, with the concept of job carving or carving a job out of roles best fit or best suited for an individual being mentioned. Providing individuals with FASD with mentorship and advocacy in the workplace also has the potential to help individuals with confidence in the workplace and set a path for success. Navigation through the legal system, in comparison to the other topics, does have a larger amount of literature covering it and recommendations in place, though no system is well or perfectly equipped to serve individuals with FASD effectively. There's continued work needed in that field in identification of and education on FASD in the legal system, and training in advocacy and accommodation. So from these overarching themes, 3 main conclusions can really be made. First, that FASD is complex. Interventions and supportive programming must be tailored to each individual's needs and strengths and be harmonized across sectors. Secondly, care doesn't start and end with clinics. Involvement in education of caregivers, schools, social services, employers, and the legal system is critical. And third, FASD is lifelong. Our systems of care and support must reflect that, reaching beyond childhood into adolescence and adulthood. But we're very excited to share more results from this review as we make our way through data extraction. I'd just like to quickly thank Dr. Prabhat Betty, Dr. Anna Hanlon-Dearman, and the CanFASD Trainee Program for their support and encouragement through this, and also for allowing me to be involved in a program like this. And thank you for taking the time to listen. And also here are some references. And that is all I have today. So thank you very much.
Thanks for playing that, Kristen. That's a really interesting talk, and it struck me about how interdisciplinary and very ambitious that project is. It's spanning lots of different systems and sectors and highlights how relevant FASD is across settings and contexts. So I'm really looking forward to following that project and hearing about what they learn. So next we will hear from Sarah Beebe. Sarah is beginning her master's degree in school and clinical child psychology at the University of Alberta this coming fall. As an undergraduate, she explored resilience and internalizing mental health symptoms in children and youth with prenatal alcohol exposure. So today, Sarah will be sharing highlights from her honors thesis focused on how personal strengths and supportive relationships may help youth with prenatal alcohol exposure to experience better mental health outcomes. So go ahead, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to present this work. First and foremost, I wanted to acknowledge that my experiences and of education and research are possible because the University of Alberta stands on traditional lands of the Cree, Blackfoot, Métis, Nakota, Dene, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe peoples. As a settler, I express my gratitude to live and work on Treaty 6 territory, land that has been cared for by diverse Indigenous peoples since time immemorial, reminding us that we're all in relation to one another and to the land. So, some background on my research. Youth with FASD experience high rates of anxiety and depression. But overall, there is a gap of research that looks at mental health and FASD from a strengths-based lens, and there is a call to shift the story of FASD and the research we conduct to a more strengths-focused one. And I felt drawn to the concept of resilience as a way to respond to this call. So, in life, we all go through things that are challenging and face adversity. Facing those challenges can feel like pushing a heavy boulder up a mountain. In research, we say that you can't have resilience without adversity. Resilience is the process of working through adversity and coming to the top of the mountain despite the challenge of pushing that boulder up. Many things can help us get that boulder up the mountain. These things can be internal to us, so like how strong we are, or if we consistently train on carrying that boulder, like Aang from my favorite show, The Avatar: The Last Airbender here. These internal factors can be developed, but they come from the individual. And these factors can also be external to us. For example, our relationships, where our support systems like friends and families can come and help us get that boulder up the mountain, not making us not have to face it alone. These factors, internal and external to us, shape how this adversity impacts us. Different people need different kinds of support, and we all have relative strengths, and we all have areas where we need more support in getting that boulder up the mountain. Why this matters for research in mental health and FASD is that to develop effective strengths-based mental health interventions for children and youth with FASD, we want to understand which resilience factors are important to bolster for this population. So this led me to ask, what is the relationship between resilience factors and anxiety and depression symptoms in children and youth? Internal resilience factors were things like personal strengths, looking at adaptability and social skills, leadership, things like that. And then relational resilience factors were things like support systems. Specifically, I wanted to look at peer relations and relationships with caregivers. And then the second research question was, does this relationship look different for youth with prenatal alcohol exposure? And the second question taps into us wanting to understand the nature of these resilience factors. Do they promote better outcomes for all youth, regardless of prenatal alcohol exposure, meaning that they would be promotive of better outcomes? Or is there something protective about them, specifically for youth with prenatal alcohol exposure for their mental health? And so hypotheses was first higher levels of resilience factors. So these personal strengths and support systems would associate with lower levels of anxiety and depression symptoms in our youth sample. And then the second one was resilience factors would moderate these relationships, acting as protective factors for youth with prenatal alcohol exposure. So this was a cross-sectional correlational design. Our sample consisted of 66 caregiver and youth pairs, and 26 of these youth have prenatal alcohol exposure. And then measured these variables with some questionnaires. So I used the BASC to look at internal and relational resilience factors. Internal resilience factors, I used the Parent Report Adaptive Scale of the BASC, which is a composite scale of these areas, so activities of daily living, adaptability, functional communication, leadership, social skills, and study skills. And then looked at relational resilience factors using Youth Self-Report to look at the interpersonal relations subscale and the relations with parents subscale. And then looked at for mental health symptoms using the MASC for looking at anxiety symptoms and the CDI for looking at depression symptoms. We used both youth report on their own mental health symptoms and then caregiver reports on their children's symptoms. So the symptoms were representing the youth's mental health from different perspectives. And so The first hypothesis was saying that higher levels of resilience factors would associate with lower levels of these mental health symptoms, and our results supported this hypothesis. And then the second hypothesis was that there would be a unique relationship between resilience factors and these mental health symptoms for youth with prenatal alcohol exposure, but the results did not support this. So instead of these being protective factors, we would say that these factors were promotive. And what this means is that these resilience factors associated with better mental health outcomes for all of the youth in our sample. And so protective would mean that we would have found something that was unique for the youth with prenatal alcohol exposure. But these results are still really positive, meaning that in a sample of youth that had youth with prenatal alcohol exposure, there was still evidence for this relationship that we were expecting. And so, going into the numbers a little bit more, individual resilience factors, things like adaptability and social skills, were reported by parents, and these actually associated with lower caregiver reports of their youth's anxiety and depression symptoms. And then relational resilience factors were reported by youth. And these, for example, better relationships with parents associated with fewer depression symptoms as reported by youth, and then more positive interpersonal relationships. So, like having the perception of having good social relationships and friendships with peers, associated with lower youth reports of anxiety and depression symptoms, and lower caregiver reports of their youth's anxiety symptoms. So, why does this matter? So we need to balance the story of FASD. There is a call to do more strengths-focused research, and this study tried to respond to this call. Identifying resilience factors in clinical tools like the BASC is powerful and strengths-focused way to counteract the deficit-based narrative of FASD. The BASC provides a holistic account of strengths and challenges through its adaptive and clinical scales. My study supports that using the parent report and self-report adaptive scales as promotive factors is feasible and can help identify positive outcomes for youth. A strength of this study is we use both caregiver and youth reports of symptoms and resilience factors. Each informant source provides unique and valuable insights and helps represent individuals and their stories more holistically. One thing that stood out to me is that positive peer relations, as reported by youth, related to lower youth reports of their own anxiety and depression symptoms. So there's something to be said about really building up those peer relations. And we can invest in these resilience factors that reflect strengths that exist in an individual and within their support networks already. In the future, interventions for anxiety and depression in youth can use this information about these resilience factors to promote better mental health outcomes. So thank you for letting me talk about my research, and thank you to the CanFASD Trainee Program for this opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. I share your excitement about this research. It's really nice to hear that you're doing some strengths-based work like Kiana. And I particularly liked the focus on that relational piece. So how relationships matter and how these are things that we can really pay attention to and nurture when we're thinking about FASD and healthy outcomes. So thank you for sharing. All right, our next presenter is Patrick Okonji. Patrick is a research coordinator for the Leave No One Behind project, working closely with multidisciplinary teams in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of Saskatchewan. In his presentation today, Patrick will outline the scope of an ongoing study focusing on access to justice for individuals with FASD. He'll discuss how this study aims to enhance practitioners' ability to recognize and accommodate populations with FASD or neurocognitive differences, ultimately promoting fair legal outcomes. So Patrick, you can go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Thank you for the opportunity to present this study. Good morning, everyone. My name is Patrick Okonji, and I'm joining you today from 36 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I'm presenting this study that is currently an ongoing study titled Leave No One Behind, Stimulating Access to Justice for Individuals with FASD. The study is led by Professor Mansfield Miller and funded by the Law Foundation of Saskatchewan. I think incidentally, we are also fortunate to be partnering with Canadian FASD on this one. I work as a research coordinator on this project, and it also comprises a research assistant and a data analyst. So the background to the study. Research shows that individuals with FASD are significantly overrepresented in courts, in jails, and in prisons. Youth with FASD 19 times, according to a study, more likely to be incarcerated than their peers. A study found 23.3% of remanded youth had FASD, and this is over 20 times the community prevalence. So this overrepresentation is often due to cognitive and behavioral traits being mistaken for intentional misconduct. So Canada's justice system currently lacks a formal process to screen or assess for FASD. So many individuals go undiagnosed, and without a diagnosis, they are denied accommodations. So this results in serious outcomes, such as harsh sentencing or even wrongful convictions and repeated incarcerations, what we also term recidivism. So there's a legal causal nexus. This diagram here emphasizes how low understanding of FASD can lead to inadequate preparation and increased risk within the legal settings. So by failing to define and accommodate FASD, the system unintentionally contributes to legal inequities. For example, this diagram shows some behaviors that could be misconceived, whereas they are brain-based. For instance, giving one-word answers during interaction of professionals. This could be misconceived as being deceptive or being uncooperative or deliberate and being guilty, whereas this is actually due to low processing speed requiring more time or mental fatigue. Sometimes also the lack of coherence and sequence in the story might be viewed as being deliberately deceptive or inconsistent and guilty. Whereas it's as a result of being unable to remember or recall events, and so on and so forth. There are also, literatures around things like confabulation and suggestibility. Confabulation, I think, refers to memory error where the individual tends to produce fabricated or distorted or misinterpreted recollections of events without a conscious intent to deceive. Suggestibility, on the other hand, also relates to tendency to alter the accounts of events because of how questions are posed or due to perceived pressure. Sometimes this might be due to a desire to please the person asking the questions. But these are by and large due to deficits in memory, encoding, executive functioning, and inhibitory control, so to speak. So some individuals with FASD might not even be able to understand terms like law, right, silence, and sometimes they even sign without full understanding. So, and also there are cases, being cited in literature about medical literature and so on and so forth about emotional regulation and judgment. So all of this increases the risk of that initial contact with the criminal justice system. These are also issues of neurological injuries that are mainly mistaken for character. So this often results in miscarriage of justice and wrongful convictions of individuals with FASD. So our objective is to identify factors that limit access to justice for individuals with FASD. We also want to map systemic gaps in policies and propose actionable strategies for equitable outcomes. And also to identify neurocognitive indicators of FASD in legal settings and produce targeted training tools and educational resources for personnel who work with the criminal justice system and other stakeholders. But permit me to say that this is an ongoing project at the moment. So we have not actually gone very far. So my presentation might be shorter than expected. So our study approach, at the moment, we have gotten ethical approval for the study. We are thinking of a scoping review, but at some point we're also wondering if we could get the systematic review out of this. But these are all ongoing, and we had a little bit of setback because our research assistant left, and we had to conduct another interviews to get a new research assistant who's just trying to settle in and continue with the reviews. So in the reviews, we'll be looking at the legal needs and barriers faced by FASD and the neurodiverse populations. We also want to try to identify evidence-based educational strategies that have worked elsewhere and that we can replicate. We are thinking of collecting survey data as well because this is a mixed method study. So we'll be looking at having surveys, qualitative interviews, and focus group discussions. So the qualitative interviews will be in FGDs as focus group discussions as well as opportunities for one-to-one interview sessions. So we're looking at also having a thematic analysis of the interviews as time goes on. So that's the study for now. Like I said, these are all ongoing. Yeah, I think I've basically talked about this slide in the previous one. So these are the ongoing activities at the moment. The systematic reviews and the plans are ongoing for surveys and qualitative interviews. We are currently still trying to draft the surveys and then have them hosted on REDCap. So we will be soliciting your support for participation to also help encourage us, the study population, to take part in this study. But it's an exciting one. So I want to thank you for this opportunity to present this. My apologies, it's an ongoing study, but I feel it's an interesting one, and I appreciate the opportunity to share this. Thank you so much. I have a couple of references here, so it might be worth looking at to learn more about this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Patrick. You're right, it's a very interesting project, and even if it's still in the early stages, it's exciting to see how it's coming together. And I really appreciate that you and your team are looking at so many different sources of information, both literature review, speaking to people who work in the system, and people with living experience. So I think you're going to gain a lot of really rich understanding and knowledge out of this project. So thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you.
Okay, our final presentation will be from Ebony Leonard. Ebony is a second-year medical student at McMaster University. She previously completed her undergraduate degree in translational and molecular medicine at the University of Ottawa. Ebony has begun to cultivate a research focus on Black health, particularly maternal and neonatal health, and aims to continue expanding her research breadth to highlight the voices of equity-deserving groups. So like Emma, Ebony is unable to attend in real time today, but she also sent us a pre-recorded presentation. So in it, Ebony will showcase literature that explores the intersectionality of identifying as Black and living with FASD, with the goal of identifying information regarding this intersectionality and providing insight into what can be done to close the gaps. So with that, we will fire up her recording.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ebony Leonard. I'm a second-year medical student, as was, I'm assuming, introduced. I am very sorry that I'm not able to be there on such short notice. There was clinical obligations that I needed to be at, but I really wanted to share my research that I had prepared for this seminar, which is titled, "What Does It Mean to be Black with FASD in Canada?" And in order to guide my research, the research question that I had developed was, what are the disparities faced by Black people with an FASD diagnosis in Canada? And I will admit this is a very broad question, as I felt that there wasn't a lot of information that I had seen originally. So I really wanted to just dive into what is the available literature that talks about the intersectionality between being Black and being Canadian. And having an FASD diagnosis in Canada. Although the intersectionality between being Black and being Canadian is an important topic to discuss as well, but won't be talked about in this seminar. And I really wanted to understand, though, in regards to the FASD and Black intersectionality of, are there any disparities in diagnosis, in prognosis, in overall experience? There was just a lot of information that I assumed would have been researched upon, but also acknowledging that there isn't a standardized way to collect race-based data within the Canadian healthcare system. So I also had an expectation that there wouldn't have been much. And really what stems from this is the fact that there are so many known health disparities that exist within the overall BIPOC community, but also that have been identified within the Black community, even in the absence of the standardized race-based data collection resource. That would be amazing and hopeful that this happens in the near future. So I really wanted to investigate what exists. And in order to, once again, guide my research, kind of creating some questions like, what are the disparities? Are there any proposed mechanisms or explanations for these disparities? And what are the knowledge gaps? And in order to do this, I created a search strategy. I do want to make it clear that I am the only reviewer, so it's not necessarily an official scoping review, but I used this based off of the scoping review I had done previously in terms of the search strategy, looking at open platforms, creating specific language for FASD, the Black race, and geographical specificity to Canada, and creating exclusion criteria. And I did all of this within Confidence. And as a result, there were 9 studies, and unfortunately 4 were duplicates. So I had screened 5 studies based off their title and abstract, and there was 1 study that I had included in the full text article analysis. And as a result, I will share with you, as it's only just 1 study, but this was actually an abstract that looked at the disparities in diagnosis of neurodevelopmental disabilities in Canadian, Indigenous, and racialized children, and it was presented at the 2022 annual conference of Canadian Pediatric Society. And as a part of this abstract, they reviewed the literature. They had found 12 papers, but none of them had talked about FASD, and specifically none of them had talked about what it means to have an FASD diagnosis within the Black population. Being that this is our only study, what do we know from this information? Nothing, unfortunately. And I was really wanting to understand, like, as I said before, the disparities in diagnosis and the care received. Are there specific comorbidities that have been identified within Black people that are not seen in other populations? What is the qualitative research in terms of like the experiential, in terms of healthcare access, prenatal care, and also just other quantitative methods to outline the racial disparities? But unfortunately, my search, acknowledging that there's limitations in my search strategy, and once again, in the fact that I'm the only reviewer, but I did not find anything as a result of the search strategy I had shown. Thus, we went back to the drawing board. And when going back to the drawing board, I said, I don't want to see the Canadian data. there wasn't much to begin with, but I don't want to see the Canadian data. I want to identify what is known globally about the intersectionality of being Black, but also having a diagnosis of FASD. And we had a lot more to work with. We had 314 studies that were included, but only 6 that were that were imported, my apologies, but only 6 were included for the full text article analysis. And from the 6, we had seen that Black infants had an up to 7-fold increase of a risk of FAS compared to white infants. And this being a CanFASD seminar, I'm sure I don't have to go into the details of FAS, but I really wanted to emphasize that there are, from what I saw, the 3 classifications. You have FAS, which is alcohol exposure. You have growth restriction. You have the physical features as well as the neurobehavioral deficits. There's also partial FAS, where you have the alcohol exposure, but only 2 of the other criteria, and the alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorders that have the alcohol exposure, the neurobehavioral deficits, without any of the physical characteristics. So from this quick synopsis, FAS is considered to be one of the more severe types of FASD due to it having all of the characteristics. And what was interesting to me is because in another study, the average alcoholic consumption varied by racial groups, with Black mothers having the lowest. So one study is saying that Black infants have a 7-fold high risk of FAS, whereas another study is saying that Black women tend to drink less. And this was proposed by potential genetic polymorphisms that were observed within around 30% of the African Americans that were studied, in order to, which concluded that this could have different impacts in the alcohol metabolism. But I believe that it is a very presumptive method and direction of going without really considering the social impacts that exist that are faced by the Black people, which is decreased prenatal access to care, lower, sometimes tending to be low socioeconomic status. So a lot of these psychosocial factors were not considered, but I just wanted to share that wasn't something that I had seen in proposition of why Black women would have less drinking, but be seen to have infants that have higher risk of FAS. And 2 other studies I had looked at had talked about the misdiagnosis and or missed diagnosis. And this comes with a lot of stigma in regards to Black youth and their behavior. One of these studies was a case report that had talked about a youth was labeled with oppositional defiant disorder and DMDD. And this carries a lot of weight in regards to schooling, in regards to jobs in the future. And he was given the pharmacotherapy and the psychotherapy to address these diagnoses, but it wasn't further evaluated that his mother had confirmed alcohol exposure until he went to a neurodevelopmental specialist. And it was then that they had diagnosed him with FAS. And if he had gone on life without having an FAS diagnosis, without having proper supports, there would have been the label. There's secondary comorbidities that exist with not being labeled correctly, such as school failure, you're not getting the appropriate resources, delinquency, incarceration, and psychiatric diagnoses. So it is very important to ensure that were diagnosed correctly. But also there was, in terms of the physical features, such as the philtrum, which is one of the physical characteristics, is not standardized across different racial and ethnic groups. And a lot of the screening tools that are used, which is where some of this data had come from, was based on clinical judgment and could not necessarily discriminate it accurately. I also wanted to spend some time on this graphic that was so beautifully created by an article I had read that was written in 2024, and it looked at the disability studies and critical race theory perspective and the racial and ethnic disparities in FASD. And to kind of make a busy slide more simple, it had looked at 3 topics which are highlighted in blue: prevention, assessment and diagnosis, and intervention. And within these 3 topics, it had identified what the disparity was. For example, in prevention, BIPOC community, Black women might have less access to prenatal care, which is psychoeducation in regards to alcohol consumption. And in terms of assessment and diagnosis, I had previously mentioned biased assessment tools that are not able to accurately discern features that could lead a clinician to diagnose FAS, any diagnosis of FASD, et cetera, and also intervention, just the lack of resources in terms of the efficacy. So in conclusion, there was not any data that I had gathered of significance that identified the intersectionality of identifying as Black and having FASD, but there were a few studies that I had gotten from mainly US based resources, but also from different parts of the world to further explain what some of that intersectionality looks like. And I think there's a lot of room for improvement, especially within the Canadian healthcare system. And hopefully, once again, that we will be able to have a standardized race-based data collection tool that we can use in order to further investigate a large range of diagnoses, but especially FASD, and how we can better support our youth and ensure that they are set up for success. I wanted to include the resources, and thank you so much. Once again, I am extremely sorry that I won't be in attendance today, but if you have any questions, I will leave my email. Please feel free to reach me. Thank you.
That was a very eye-opening presentation and really highlights so many gaps that that Ebony identified in her search and areas for future research. So it's really wonderful that she is expanding this research agenda, and I'm grateful that that she is part of the trainee program so that we can learn from Ebony. I wanted to say a really big thank you to all of our presenters today. You did such a great job sharing your research, and thank you to each of our attendees as well for joining. We hope that you'll come back and join us for future webinars. To get any more information that you might like on FASD and CanFASD, and to stay in the know, please check our website at www.canfasd.ca or follow us on our social media channels to find our resources. Also, make sure to register for our upcoming conference. The 2025 Canada FASD conference is happening in October in Toronto, and early bird pricing goes until the end of June. We hope to see everybody there. So thanks again to the trainees and everybody who attended, and I hope you have an excellent weekend.